I'm not going in.
She said, okay, I'm here today recording with a wonderful and amazing young lady who was courageous enough to sign the petition. And she just came up to me and asked me, how did I do with the petition? And I told her the signatures. And then she said this to me. She's here and she's willing to say what she just said.
Hi, yes, I'm a volunteer, and I totally agree, and I'm glad that my brother here came up with the idea to give us a voice and to be able to stand up for us and to speak out, because a lot of the times, being here, there's been a lot of situations and things that are just swept under the rug, and I feel that people are afraid to voice out the issues because of whatever reason. They feel they're gonna get kicked out, and I just really feel that he's sent from God to do this, because God knows that this place needs to change. And like I said, I mean, I wanted to do this on my own, and I just didn't know how to do it. And here my brother is, and I'm in for it, and to fight for our rights, and so we can live a better and a peaceful life here while here, because this is our home. So I believe that it is what needs to be done in order for us to have equal rights. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sister. I really appreciate your time, and thank you for being courageous enough to sign the petition and speak out for us. Lots of love for you, sister. Keep up the good work. Brothers and sisters and brothers, the message I have for you today can be summarized in one sentence. We need extreme love, peace, and inspiration, and civil disobedience education to bring a long overdue uprising and elevation of human rights. I began this with the voices of women who are at the heart of this crisis, because Arundhati Roy, social justice organizer, writer, feminist, Sydney Peace Prize winner, and a great source of inspiration to me personally for over a decade, once said, "Remember that if the struggle were to resort to violence, it will lose vision, beauty, and imagination. Most dangerous of all, it will marginalize and eventually victimize women. In a political struggle that does not have women at the heart of it, above it, below it, and within it, is no struggle at all." I agree with that and work with these words in my mind and heart. The first voice you heard was Mary, a mentally challenged former resident of Salvation Army with a beautiful service dog. She was evicted, terminated from Salvation Army housing along with her service dog against her will on March 17th, 2016. When you hear that scream in an institution, it may remind you of the film One Who Flew the Cuckoo's Nest. But that scream is real, and it is in the Salvation Army. That is her voice screaming at Steve Lytle, shelter director, demanding for the advocacy service of my colleagues and I, and she demanded not to be forced into their back office alone without us. We were illegally barred from helping her and verbally threatened, then threatened in writing. Moments later, that day, they evicted her. The second voice is one of my colleagues, who I first met when she signed the first of many petitions I circulated, asking the government to launch a federal investigation on the Salvation Army. Her fears, like so many at Salvation Army, were that she would be kicked out. Less than 2 months later, while trying to stop Mary from being kicked out, she was threatened by Steve Lytle. My name is Dee. I come to you today utilizing my First Amendment rights as an American to petition the government for a redress of grievances with a life and death emergency as all over the world. This week, protests are taking place this second involving the protests against a multi-billion-dollar institutional franchise that has sexually abused thousands of children for decades, illegally evicted countless vulnerable clients worldwide, and continues to violate the U.S. constitutional rights of former foster children, caregivers, and all of the people who deserve rights. Vulnerable people here in the USA. That institution is known as the Salvation Army in the USA and known as Salvos overseas. It is an honor for me to be a member of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, known as the NAACP, that has over 300,000 members and has been fighting for equality since 1909. It is an honor for me to be a member and lead organizer of Southern California ADAPT. I am in solidarity with Disabled in Action, a civil rights organization that has been fighting for equality for people with disabilities since 1970. The Disabled in Action motto is, "Nothing about us without us." It is a motto I hold dear to my heart. It is an honor to be a member of Mind Freedom. Mind Freedom is one of the very few totally independent groups in the mental health field with no funding from or controlled by governments, drug companies, religions, corporations, or the mental health system. Mind Freedom International is the only group of its kind accredited by the United Nations as a non-governmental organization, NGO, with consultative roster status. Mind Freedom is where the power of mutual support combines with the power of human rights and activism. The work of Mind Freedom is more relevant than ever as I witnessed Steve Lytle try to pressure Mary, a mentally challenged elderly woman with a service dog, to abandon her chosen advocates, which were my colleagues and I. I speak to you today not as the lead organizer of Southern California chapter of ADAPT, nor on behalf of the NAACP, nor Disabled in Action, Mind Freedom, nor Care Leavers Australia Network. I do not speak on their behalf at this moment at all, because Salvation Army has shown they will use their lawyers to defend their desire to discriminate, as they did in the 10-year legal battle against the LGBT community and the 2-year legal battle which they settled to illegally evict pregnant women. 4 pregnant women, to be precise. I speak to you on behalf of a group that has 100% people of color in administration, women and men, Latino and African American, and over 50% disabled former foster children in administration, care leavers, as founding administrative members, as well as over 39 member affiliates who are all races, including white, African American, Latino, and more. That group is the Internal Client Association. I am a founding member of the Internal Client Association, also known as the ICA, a group who are current and former residents of Salvation Army Bell Shelter, the largest homeless shelter and transitional housing on the West Coast, west of the Mississippi. I am also a disabled care leaver, known as a former foster child in the USA, as well as a United States Marine Corps veteran. In April 2016, I was part of a silent protest held directly outside the Salvation Army Bell Shelter, off their property on the outskirts of Los Angeles, California. It was done in solidarity with the much bigger protest by survivors of abuse in Salvation Army institutions, who are courageously protesting outside the hotel where the Prime Minister's wife launched the Salvo's annual Red Shield appeal. People calling for justice from Salvation Army are part of the White Shield appeal. This is courageous because Salvation Army has tried to have them, part of the White Shield appeal, arrested in the past, but the police, once hearing of the abuse, refused to make arrests. Here in LA, our protesters are just as courageous because they risk not only eviction from Salvation Army staff, as seen in these termination threat letters, the 2 African Americans from Caucasian American Shelter Director Steve Lytle, but they risk their lives because, as the Black Lives Matter campaign has excellently shown, if LA police are called, they are infamous for shooting unarmed people of color. In many publications throughout the world, including Skynet News, Sydney Herald, the Special Broadcasting Service, they have reported the protests again and again. The Guardian also reported that child sex abuse survivor support organization Care Leavers Australia Network announced it would hold a silent protest outside the hotel to draw attention to the Salvo's failure to fully back a national redress scheme for abuse survivors. In the USA, the Internal Client Association, joined by the Los Angeles ADAPT chapter and the Southern California ADAPT, as well as members of NAACP, Black Lives Matter, Mind Freedom, held a silent protest outside and just off the Salvation Army Bell Shelter property at Rickenbauer and Eastern, completely off of their property, to draw attention to the Care Leavers Australia Network protest of Salvo's failure to fully back national redress scheme for abuse survivors, and also to draw attention to the U.S. Salvation Army's unconstitutional oppression of United States Salvation Army residents' right to have a self-advocacy group. In addition, the U.S. protest was to protest the completely illegal and unethical eviction of Mary. You can hear the 51-minute eviction ordeal recorded from start to finish in a separate recording that we call 51 Minutes of Anguish. Politicians have apologized for abuses to the Australian Salvation Army self-advocacy group, while here in the USA, Salvation Army residents and former foster children, care leavers, have received no formal apology, and our rights as residents are taken away, and even our constitutional rights are denied, as if the pain and anguish of the civil rights movement never happened. These denied rights include, but are not limited to, our First Amendment right to petition. Number 2, the First Amendment privilege of peaceful assembly and protest. Number 3, violation of our constitutional Fourth Amendment rights, which requires that investigators or drug testers or locker searchers have both probable cause to believe that a particular person has committed a certain crime and a warrant issued by a judge in order to search for evidence connected with the crime. They violate this right when they choose to search lockers, to search people's bags, to take urine tests, and to breathalyze people each and every single night. I need to say a personal note. On a very personal note, as an African American, I cannot help but to remember how our ancestors were placed upon auction blocks hundreds of years ago. They were stripped of their right to be a human. They were legally called products. They were placed on the auction block and stripped of their clothing because the people who purchased them, their masters, wanted to see them naked before they purchased them. They were stripped of their dignity. They were then stripped away from their families because often the slave masters only wanted to purchase the strong males to take care of the cotton. So the daughters were sold elsewhere. Then the daughters, ranging from ages 9 through 15, were stripped of their virginity. They were sexually abused. This happened for hundreds of years. And then at the end of their lifetimes of this type of stripping away of humanity, they were, of course, many of them stripped of sanity, stripped of hope, which is why slavery went on for so long. And then, when slavery finally ended, we were told this stripping away of our humanity would never happen again. But no matter how much I read about slavery, I never, ever hear about someone stripping away the slave's urine. I never hear about them stripping away the breath, because they had no need for their urine. They had no need for them to breathe in a tube. So now, how can we say that we as a nation have progressed when our constitutional rights are violated and we are forced to give our urine sample in urine test against our constitutional rights? We are forced every single night in Salvation Army Bell Shelter to breathe into a breathalyzer. This is regardless of whether we've committed a crime. I've committed no crime. I'm not on parole. I was president of the St. Oda Drugs Club when I was in high school. Many people are just treated this way because Salvation Army can do so. I, like many other homeless residents, former foster children, and veterans, pay Salvation Army 1/3 of my income, plus they get thousands of dollars in federal funds each month for many of us. We are requesting human rights, federal whistleblower rights, protection rights, and most of all, we want nothing about us, especially illegal evictions, terminations done without us. So we want the right to form self-advocacy groups, the right to fill out HIPAA forms, as seen here, and share information to stop the countless evictions, such as the rights they have in Australia, without further racial harassment and threats from people like Shelter Director Steve Lytle and his staff Alma, Amber, and every single Salvation Army officer who sits back and allows it to happen. Rather than to give our opinion on Salvation Army, which their powerful legal department may interpret as slander, the Internal Client Association stands behind and repeats the findings of Charity Watch, the American Institute of Philanthropy. Charity Watch, founded more than 20 years ago as the American Institute of Philanthropy, AIP, is America's most independent, assertive charity watchdog. After an audit of Salvation Army, they reported, and I quote, from their publicly available report, the Salvation Army, unlike most other major charities, is not required to file public information because it is considered by the IRS and state authorities to be a church. Many people believe that the Salvation Army is as American as apple pie, but in actuality, it is a global organization with its headquarters in London, England. Be aware that the organization lacks an independent governing board. AIP encourages all religious and secular non-profit organizations to demonstrate good governance by electing an outside board of directors that consists predominantly of members who do not receive compensation or other financial benefits from the organization that they are governing. Otherwise, non-profit directors may be tempted to place their own interest over the best interest of the organization. The absence of outside directors at any nonprofit could also lead to serious problems being swept under the rug and away from public scrutiny. That is a perfect description of why we are facing these abuses and coordinated attacks on an hour-by-hour basis from Shelter Director Steve Lytle and his shelter manager, upper management officers, and the territorial office that allows it to continue to happen in growing severity. The Internal Client Association has submitted resolutions requesting access to our documents and program policies, improving inhumane hygiene issues such as the bed bug problems, and reducing retaliation. The administration of ICA stand in solidarity with care leavers who just this week courageously protested in Australia for Salvation Army to redress over 100 years of child sex abuse against foster children by their franchise. Many care leavers groups have agreed on the following definition of a care leaver as being, quote, any adult who spent time in care as a child under the age of 18. This care would have been approved by the state through a court order or on a voluntary basis. It can range from as little as a few months to as long as one's whole childhood, 18 years. Such care could be in foster care, residential care, mainly children's homes, or other arrangements outside the immediate or extended family. The care could have been provided directly by the state, mainly through local authority social services departments, or by the voluntary or private sector. It also includes a wide range of accommodation. For example, it would include secure units, approved schools, industrial schools, and other institutions that have a more punitive element than mainstream foster or residential care. The Guardian reported, and I quote, Care Leavers Australian network represents hundreds of people who were physically and sexually abused as children when they were housed in now notorious and extremely unethical institutions such as the Riverview Training Farm in Queensland, where boys were allegedly locked in a cage and made to eat food donated by townspeople for animals, unquote. Okay, so I added the words extremely unethical, but I had to do it. We here in the Salvation Army in the USA are equally familiar with such inhumane treatment, as you can see on these recent photos. The U.S. Salvation Army receives federal funds, so we, the ICA, call on U.S. federal government to conduct a public audit of Salvation Army. What do I mean when I say we need an audit report and access to accurate information? Let me give you an example of relevant events that took place just within the last 2 weeks. On March 31st, 2016, the LA Times announced on the front page of their newspaper the director of the nonprofit organization, the LA Fair, resigned after the LA Times published a very public front page audit report, which found his pay increased 90% in just 6 years to over $1 million annually, while the fair lost money at the same time. That is relevant because a preponderance of evidence shows the LA Fair, which is wrecked by international scandal, had more humane bathroom and hygiene conditions than the Salvation Army, which we live in now. So why is there no public and federal audit on Salvation Army directors and staff such as Steve Lytle and his staff such as Alma, Amber, and others, despite the international protests and the reports from Charity Watch and the American Institute of Philanthropy's report regarding directors? Another recent example of the effects of accurate information is found in the historic protests that are taking place all over the world right now after leaked documents from a Panamanian law firm known as the Panama Papers became available to the public. Within the last few days, Reuters published an article titled Panama Papers Leak Leads to Largest Protest in Iceland's History. When asked by the reporter of Icelandic Channel 2 News if he had at any point considered resigning in light of the latest revelations, Gunnlaugsson said that he would not resign due to this or any other matter, because his government had achieved, quote, amazing results in very important issues, and it's important that it gets to finish that work, unquote. That very next day, Reuters reported, and I quote, Iceland's Prime Minister Sigmundur David Gunnlaugsson is to step down after leaked documents from a Panamanian law firm showed his wife owned an offshore company with big claims on collapsed Icelandic banks, his party said. Those who stand for equality and justice for the vulnerable must not be distracted by Salvation Army's, quote, amazing results in very important issues, unquote, because it is not important that the staff responsible for these abuses gets to finish that work if it means hundreds of foster children continue getting sexually abused in their care, or we continue to live with toilets overflowing with feces due to our chosen method of advocacy being illegally denied. The prior article states, whistleblower Edward Snowden suggested in a retweet that the protest might be the largest by percentage of population in history. Gunnlaugsson became the first prominent casualty from the revelations in the so-called Panama Papers, which have cast light on the financial arrangements of an array of politicians and public figures across the globe, and the companies and financial institutions they use. Earlier on Tuesday, Gunnlaugsson had asked Iceland's president to dissolve parliament in the face of a looming no-confidence vote and mass street protest over the revelations, with the fallout from the leaks reverberating across the globe. British Prime Minister David Cameron also came under fire from opponents who accused him of allowing a rich elite to dodge their taxes. And in China, the Beijing government dismissed as groundless reports that the families of President Xi Jinping and other current and former Chinese leaders were linked to offshore accounts. The more than 11.5 million documents were leaked from the Panamanian law firm Mossack Fonseca. Among those named in them are friends of Russian President Vladimir Putin, relatives of the leaders of China, Britain, and Pakistan, and the President of Ukraine. The papers have caused public outrage over the world's rich and powerful are able to stash their cash and avoid taxes while many people suffer austerity and hardship, unquote. We officially call upon the federal government to audit Steve Lytle, shelter director, Alma, shelter manager, David Jeffries, national commander of the Salvation Army, and other Salvation Army officers and staff who allow these abuses to continue. Not simply their paycheck, but audit their personal banking transactions, just as we have seen around the world which have proven very effective in bringing about swift justice long overdue. We are suffering in austerity and hardship with outdoor toilets like outdoor animals in a multi-billion-dollar institution while their officers live in luxury. Let us take a look at Steve Lytle, shelter director. Salvation Army is an international company based in England that allows care leavers to advocate for victims overseas in Australia. But here in the USA, on March 17, 2016, Steve Lytle verbally and viciously threatened 3 advocates. One is a female person of color. That is the second voice that you heard, along with 2 male persons who are people of color, 50% of whom are currently disabled, former foster children, care leavers, 25% of whom are U.S. veterans, in front of witnesses, illegally telling them to end their advocacy group, and the next day sent threat letters threatening of termination, one of which is seen here, which would make these people homeless on the street, endangering their lives, despite the fact these 3 advocates have no place to live. Earlier that same day, March 17, 2016, this video that you see here was made of the inhumane bathrooms we live in, which is why we must continue to make the international press release petitioning for a federal investigation. The federal investigation must not only examine the Salvation Army, but just as importantly as seen in Iceland, they must examine the affiliates, ombudsmen, the Veteran Administration liaisons, and Department of Urban Housing Development, HUD, the Department of Mental Health, who are failing at their job to protect residents and fail to ensure residents receive even our most basic and guaranteed constitutional rights. A perfect example is urine testing without warrant or probable cause. Many people have noticed that urine tests have been used as a tool for harassment. The Homeless Law blog states, and I quote, "If a shelter is testing for drug use just to prevent drug crimes from happening, then, depending on whether and how it is connected with the government, it may be violating the Constitution's Fourth Amendment, which requires that investigators or drug testers have both, number 1, probable cause to believe that a particular person has committed a certain crime, and number 2, a warrant issued by a judge in order to search for evidence connected with the crime. If the shelter is targeting certain individuals or groups for drug testing, then those individuals or groups may have a legal claim of discrimination. Even if the shelter is testing everyone or else is doing random drug testing that doesn't target individuals or groups, the drug test might be seen as invasions of privacy. The American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU, takes a strong stand on this and has won court cases by proving that the entities testing for drug use did not have reasons that outweighed people's right to have the chemical content of their urine kept private. Unquote. So even in the instances where the American Civil Liberties Union has won multiple court cases, the Salvation Army continues to violate the civil liberties of Americans, and they continue to act in an unconstitutional manner. An African American member of ICA was targeted in this manner within a few days after Salvation Army knew his identity. In order so that he is not retaliated against, we will call him E. They tried to convince E his urine test may be fuzzy. Fuzzy is the word that they use. This fuzzy could lead to eviction until he politely requested to see it, at which time he saw it was clean. When he spoke to me about it, he seemed in utter disbelief at how unethical harassment is at Salvation Army and how blatant it is. This is the epitome of dishonor. Sinead O'Connor, who has been an outspoken activist for foster children, once said, quote, "When you dishonor the utter glory and majesty of black people, you lie. Your heart lies to you, and you let it." Unquote. A few days after I began stopping illegal evictions of people of all races, Latino, white, black, and more, in Salvation Army with petitions, they sent me a letter that you can see here, which basically criminalizes me far worse than any police officer ever has done. In summary, they told me that I am guilty until I prove myself innocent by allowing them access and to not only search me, but to search my urine without probable cause or a warrant. That was the first time I received such a letter, despite living there and paying monthly fees for 5 months. Many top DUI lawyers state you should always refuse the breathalyzer and standardized field sobriety tests, and that is because many of those breathalyzers are defective and they can ruin your life. And in this case of the Salvation Army, urine tests and breathalyzers can get you evicted and put on the street and face a life and death situation. By the time you read this or hear this, I may have already been terminated, exited, or evicted from my housing at Salvation Army Transitional Housing due to this letter. Nevertheless, I call upon the homeless street newspapers. I call upon the largest newspapers, the LA Times, and all media and all people to urge for an audit of the policies of the Salvation Army Bell Shelter located at 5600 Rickenbauer in Bell, California, which is a city within Los Angeles County. I call upon all people to urge for an audit of the Salvation Army Southern California Divisional and Territorial Offices Headquarters, located at 180 East Ocean Boulevard in Long Beach, California. That divisional and territorial office covers the following counties in California: Los Angeles, Orange, San Luis Obispo, and Santa Barbara, Ventura. We met with their staff, begged them for help, and they allowed their retaliation to not only continue, but to exponentially increase. What we have repeatedly seen from the Salvation Army is that no one, no matter how vulnerable, is safe from their unlawful evictions, that they do not permit people time for an appeal. Less than 2 years ago, on November 12, 2014, the Washington Times had a headline story titled, quote, Salvation Army can't evict women for pregnancy, HUD, unquote. It stated, the Salvation Army has agreed to pay $12,000 to each of 4 homeless women and change its transitional housing program policy under a pregnancy non-discrimination settlement with a federal housing agency. The giant charity agreed to pay $48,000 to the women because it evicted them. Such a policy is unlawful, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, said. That trial took over 2 years since HUD first subpoenaed Salvation Army in 2012. Over 2 years they paid lawyers from the Red Kettle money and donations the public gives them, hoping to continue to deny the pregnant women their federal and constitutional rights, as they had done for over 100 years. It is not until HUD or the federal government gets involved does the USA Salvation Army discontinue their unlawful policies, many of which they have used for over 100 years. It is not until the Royal Commission gets involved in Australia do they respond to the Care Leavers of Australia network. There is an article on a professional LinkedIn page on the internet titled, quote, Where the Vultures Feed, How the Salvation Army Dupes the Public and Live Cushy Lives Off the Carrion of the Poor, unquote. In the article, the author and administrator of Salvation Army Los Angeles area for over 9 years at one time states, quote, I would estimate that in Southern California, less than 10% of social services operating money came from private donations, and a number of programs such as the Salvation Army, Bell Shelter, and Alegria were operated with up to 98% with taxpayer dollars, unquote. If after working as a former administrator for 9 years, his calculation is even half right, then the public has a right to know exactly where that taxpayer-funded money goes, even if that requires a special Senate hearing or a United Nations consultation to circumvent the religious secrecy rules. This transparency is needed because our current living status involves outdoor showers and outdoor porta potties with feces flowing over the top like the worst third world country in an institution that was recently featured in Forbes magazine as being one of the 50 richest multi-billion-dollar charities on earth. His article states, quote, the Salvation Army has vast holdings of land in Los Angeles and also has a 45-acre property with multi-million-dollar property in Rancho Palos Verdes on a stunning bluff overlooking the Pacific Ocean that serves as the officers' training college. Interestingly, the Salvation Army could afford to keep and maintain the luscious, safe, and resort-like environment at the Salvation Army Crestmont College, unquote. But they can't afford to have toilets that work for residents, and they can't afford to let us form self-advocacy groups. His article concludes by saying, quote, "My hope is this article illuminates the strange climate and culture of self-servanthood the Salvation Army has become," unquote. There is self-servanthood in Salvation Army Bell Shelter Administration, but I, as well as my fellow Internal Client Association members, do still believe at least 97% of the staff treat us well. We do not want to see Salvation Army Bell Shelter closed down by inspectors like the Salvation Army's Carlton House, with 1,000 residents, was closed down due to inhumane conditions, as reported by the newspapers. The private and secret investigations do nothing to improve Salvation Army. Now, in Iceland, they noted that a huge percentage of the population showed up in Iceland's largest protest. However, you must also realize that it wasn't just adults, children showed up too, because the children understood the severity of these crimes. So for the children and the teenagers listening, the best way to describe these investigations at Salvation Army that the government currently does is what I call a sub-Scooby-Doo investigation. The prefix sub means below, and Scooby-Doo refers to popular cartoon group that solved mysteries. Every episode, the Scooby-Doo mystery group would talk to victims, offer to help, find the bad guy, and then tell the victim, "We found the bad guy." What HUD, the Veterans Administration Liaison, the Veteran Administration officials, and the Office of the Inspector General, as well as all the other groups that are supposed to be protecting shelter residents, does is far less and far below a Scooby-Doo investigation. It is sub-Scooby-Doo investigation quality. They send automated emails saying they will not talk to you before or after the investigation. They are far overwhelmed. This is why federal laws must protect our right to choose our own advocates who actually speak to us. What we need is a bright, warm light of a public audit and front page newspaper investigations, such as LA Times did for the LA Fair, to let people see the difference between those staff who love clients and those staff who loathe clients and loot from clients. Much like in the March 31st, 2016 LA Times article, much like the Panama Papers produced for the administration in Iceland, which caused the largest protest in Iceland's history. It caused the largest civil disobedience in Iceland's history. It caused their resignation in both situations. That is the power of accurate information. Due to the fact that I participated in a protest of peaceful, nonviolent civil disobedience off of the property of the Salvation Army Bell Shelter property several days after the shelter director unethically told me and my fellow client advocates to end our group. This letter, these words that you are hearing or reading now, may cause them to unethically terminate or evict me from my bed. However, I must do what is right and peaceful in my heart, just as every civil disobedience social justice worker has done for me to get where I am today, just as every underground railroad assistant and worker did to stop slavery. I know that. As Martin Luther King said, a policy, quote, becomes unjust when it is used to maintain and to deny citizens the First Amendment privilege of peaceful assembly and protest, unquote. Steve Lytle's policy does just that. The Salvation Army's policy does just that. I did the protest with many others in solidarity with hundreds of fellow care leavers, children sexually abused by Salvation Army staff in Australia, in a spirit of extreme love and mutuality. I did it because, among other reasons, I, as a former foster child, know, much like the Catholic child abuse scandal, there are probably hundreds and thousands more former foster children like me and current foster children being sexually abused by the Salvation Army all over the world because of their culture of self-servanthood, culture of secrecy, a culture of retaliation. It is because of a self-servant culture of strict secrecy that we must speak out. The only difference is the USA doesn't have wonderful self-advocate groups like Care Leavers Australian Network, and that is why I refuse to allow people like Steve Lytle and his oppressive administrative staff, such as Alma, to succeed in their harassment and end our client advocacy group. Negotiations ended with Steve Lytle when he tried to end our group. I have requested over 6 times in writing on official grievance forms to have these complaints brought in person to David Jeffries, the national commander of the Salvation Army, before we started advocacy work, but he has ignored all requests, including a certified mail letter addressed to him with a signed return receipt, returned to me and signed by his secretary, as seen here. Therefore, it is fitting that I conclude this letter with a few words from Martin Luther King Jr. that have inspired, trained, and motivated the internal client association and every advocacy group and civil rights group I have ever joined. The words came to him when he wrote one of his greatest speeches, initially on toilet paper, while in jail after a civil disobedience, and it is titled Letter from a Birmingham Jail. I conclude this letter with his words, but before I do, I thank everyone for your support. I thank you for circulating this letter or circulating this audio file, and I want everyone to know, no matter who you are, you have love personally from me, and you have the love from all members of the Internal Client Association. I quoted many people and articles in this letter. I want to apologize for not taking the time to properly credit each and every source with titles and academic citations. My current living situation with constant illegal evictions of my residents and peers, which I am still working to help prevent, is very stressful. So please accept my apologies, and I ask that people quote the correct people with credit. The woman who gave me photos of her children being bit by bed bugs because Salvation Army refuses to professionally exterminate was evicted in the last couple of days due to unconstitutional policies. No, I feel the need to just a brief detail of what the last 7 days have been like. Matter of fact, okay, 7 days ago exactly, the Panama Papers were released. And there were protests all over the world, the largest in Iceland's history, as you know. Five days ago, that day is April 5th, 2016. On April 5th, 2016, we prepared for our International Day of Protest against the Salvation Army, the first day of the Uprising and Elevation Human Rights Campaign. On April 5th, it is April 5th in the USA, it is actually April 6th in Australia. So we read on their Twitter how their resolve and determination was so high that they showed up at 1 a.m. in Sydney, Australia to launch the civil disobedience at the Salvation Army's annual fundraiser, attended by the Prime Minister's wife, Lucy Turnbull, and many dignitaries. On that day, April 5th, 2016, we spend the day secretly preparing posters and flyers. We know if we are found out by Salvation Army, they will initiate heavy retaliation and evictions. The evening after the protests, press releases are released in Australia, calling the abuse the greatest failure in Salvation Army's history. That was from Lucy Turnbull, the Prime Minister's wife. The next day is April 6th, 2016. At 8:05 a.m., I and another African American, in order to protect his identity, we will call him Jay. Jay's a resident, and we begin walking out of the Salvation Army bell shelter, and I have a very large flat container with the poster hidden inside. The staff stares very hard because they know I have been outspoken about human rights, and they know that I've been organizing people. We are on our way to meet the other groups at a nearby rendezvous point. Suddenly, Steve Lytle, shelter director, is pulling up in his car to start his workday. He sees us. He gives us a very long, angry look. He has just gotten to work. We quickly walk away. Minutes later, we have met up with the others several blocks away, far off Salvation Army property, to start the peaceful international solidarity protests and peaceful civil disobedience with the signs. Suddenly, Steve Lytle slowly drives by, and he stares at us, harassing us, stalking us, and trying to intimidate us. Even worse, we believe he's trying to find out the protesters' identity to retaliate against them as he did our other Salvation Army resident members with verbal and written threats once he learned their identities. We can clearly see him with a red, angry face in his car. He has thrown a tantrum. The last thing in the world a racist individual and a shelter director wants to see is a large NAACP logo on a sign and poster at an international protest against his employer. Later that night, I spend a couple hours writing up an official grievance about it. I organize it, I place it in a grievance, I get a copy, I turn it in. At this moment, the mother of the child who was bitten by the bedbugs is forced to sleep in a common area. She's forced to sleep not in a bed, but on an army cot. She's forced to sleep there because they violated her constitutional rights with a urine test. And when they took that urine test, the staff yelled very loudly for everyone to hear, for the other staff to hear, this test is defective. They know these tests are defective. We believe it is retaliation. We know that the staff received our petition, and we notice they are retaliating against the peoples who are listed on the petition. The petition using our constitutional right to petition the government for a redress of grievances. On April 7th, 2016, I wake up. I'm ready to start the day. I make a decision not to be afraid. Oh, I should back up and let you know why I made a decision not to be afraid. Because at 8:05 a.m., the previous day, April 6, 2016, we, the other African American, Jay and I, left at 8:05 a.m. from Salvation Army Bell Shelter, and when we came back at 9:33 a.m. the same day, we walked back to our cubicle area. We first walked to his, and he noticed that the staff had cut through his lock while he was gone. He was gone from his cubicle less than 90 minutes. He was gone on a protest. Steve Lytle saw us on the protest. They have never cut through his lock before. He has lived and paid rent in transitional housing for a year, and that has never happened. They typically do locker searches on Fridays, or they may alternate with Mondays, but it's never Wednesday. I've been there 5 months, it's never been Wednesdays. He's been there a year, it's never been Wednesday. This is the most certain, the most despicable form of retaliation that we've seen yet. I requested that Jay make a recording. He was extremely emotional and distraught, but I vividly recall seeing the Rosa Parks story movie. And while they were being harassed, after she bravely chose not to give up her seat, when Rosa Parks was harassed at her home, when her husband was harassed, she had the presence of mind to remember what the NAACP said, and that is to document everything, every little thing. So he and I were very distraught, very emotionally bothered by them cutting through his lock within the less than 90 minutes that we were gone on a Wednesday. And it's never been done before. And on a Wednesday in the 5 months and the 1 year that the 5 months that I've been there, the 1 year that he's been there, we were distraught about it, but I asked him could I record. What you will hear next.
4:34 p.m. Wednesday, April 6, 2016. Do you give me permission to record?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so we're not going to mention his name due to retaliation, but we will say that he was involved. He was involved in a federally protected confidential event today, and he was witnessed walking with another person involved. That would be me. And because of that, he knew in advance he would be subject to a great deal more harassment and retaliation. So I'm going to let you detail one of the acts of retaliation that just occurred to him just today while we were gone after we left this morning.
From approximately 08:30 to 09:30, there was a decision made by the top brass to do a search. It was not planned, but from my understanding that mine was the first they started with, and my lock was on my locker. It was fixed, and I noticed right away when I came back that my chair, which is usually inside my dorm, was not there, and a jacket which I just purchased was on the ground, and it was dirty, like it had been thrown on the ground. Had dust all over it, and I saw, and I'm holding now, the zip tie that was put on after my lock was cut. But I did not give a key to the staff because searching property without the owner there, even if you're just a tenant, is illegal. And under the Fourth Amendment, we have protections, and under international law, especially, vulnerable populations deserve a certain amount of privacy, and this was a clear reprisal against my participation in said event today at Rickenbacker and Slauson, because it happened literally. They were parallel, the two events. The search, which began with my locker and went around to the rest of the cluster, was initiated at the exact same time that the director of the complex drove by and witnessed a few of us agitating out by the very busy intersection. So that is my take on the events.
Thank you very much. Thank you for being courageous, and you're a definite hero in my eyes and in all the people's eyes who you're going to help who you helped in the future by standing up. Also, just so people can understand, the precedents for this happening. Has this ever happened to you before them cutting your lock, and how long, just in terms of months, have you been here?
I've been here a full year, and I've never had anything like this happen before, not until today. And so it's pretty obvious to me that the two incidents, the march/protest, and the breaking and entering of my locker were certainly correlated. But the locker searches are typically done on Fridays, each Friday, and even then it's announced, and the clients are to open the doors and to just allow the managers to poke inside or just kind of peek inside. But this was took place on a Wednesday, so unplanned and random, but certainly with the motive behind it, which is squashing or stomping out this uprising that's happening across the population with those who are just have had it with the conditions here, from the plumbing issues, to the restrooms and everything, and just everything else. This huge increase in attitude and the more kind of feeling of incarceration versus rehabilitation that's been taking place. So I just applaud you, and I thank you for what you're doing with all the organizations involved. And I hope that you just soldier on, and you have my support.
Thank you very much. Again, you're a hero, and again, we can't thank you enough for what you've done and the sacrifice and just so people can understand just one more thing on a personal level. Do you feel violated? Do you feel like you can expect more retaliation from this administration? Do you feel like they're making it so you're uncomfortable here now?
Yes, that's been happening for some time, because I've filled out grievances, and I've sent emails to the program manager and to the case manager, basically saying that, with the security doing rounds, that it's a massive invasion of our privacy, and that people who are just trying to get back on their feet, who are dealing with things from basic mental health issues, which many have, to things like just traumatic brain injury or post-traumatic stress disorder, or just the general depression that happens from having lost so much or having to start again, to be bullied by security attendants, most of which maybe could use more training and education, and though they have the title and are doing what they've been told to do, it's still perhaps unbeknownst to them, is still a gross violation of international statutes and conventions when it comes to protection of people in programs like these, especially when they're receiving funds from public sector, private sector, and all the donations that come in from people who believe in what the Salvation Army does and believes in, and would not believe actually what is actually going on. So yes, that's answered the question. It's any type of serious challenge to the system is met with a very aggressive inhospitality, and that's what I've been facing even before today. But the bravery of the gentleman before me convinced me to just stand up, and I had really had enough with being made to feel as if I owed them, as if they were doing me a favor by me receiving the services, having to ask for food, almost having to it was just really humiliating, and it's not something anyone should have to go through. So that's my take on that point.
Thank you very much, and I can't say enough about your heroism and your courage and standing up, because this does make a difference, because there's protests all over the world, and we're going to start right now. And I just want to make sure you give me permission to record this and share this. Is that correct?
Yes, you have my permission to record this and to use it in whatever capacity you need to do so.
Thank you, sir. Keep up the great work.
Then, the next day, April 7th, 2016, I realized I had to make a decision not to be afraid. Because hopefully you will get to take a look at the 88-page resolution requesting that Salvation Army stop the retaliation against residents and resident advocate groups. And in that 88-page document, you will see that when Salvation Army illegally evicted people in Gramercy, another Salvation-owned building, the women said they want us to be afraid. They want us to feel alone. But I had to make a decision not to be afraid. So typically when I leave my cubicle area, my bed area, I place a purple blanket over the top. I try to make it look as beautiful as possible, because I know they're looking for me to mess up at any time. And if it's a holiday time, I try to put a couple holiday decorations. But this time, on April 7th, 2016, after they cut through Jay's lock, I made a decision that I would not be afraid, and I placed the advocate groups' logos and their protest flyers all over the top of my bed. And you can see some pictures here. I made a decision not to be afraid, and I encourage each and every one of you listening today to make a decision not to be afraid, to make a decision to speak up, to make a decision to know you deserve your constitutional rights here in the United States of America, to make a decision all over the world to know that you deserve human rights. Less than a year ago, in May 2015, there was an international protest in London, England, and they were protesting against the workers' regime, what they call forced labor by Salvation Army. That was in London, England, the headquarters of the Salvation Army. We also have that same problem of forced unpaid labor by Salvation Army here in the USA. We must make a decision not to be afraid to ask for our human rights. Forced unpaid labor is as close as we ever want to come to going back to slavery. On April 7th, 2016, I placed those flyers on my bed. When I came back later that day, I saw that Jay had left. I don't know where he went. I know that the last time I seen him, he was distraught. He knew what was coming next. He knew that they would work him over in the same way they worked me over. The same hour by hour, day by day, unending harassment. That's what they do when you speak up for your rights in the Salvation Army. April 7th, 2016. At 10 a.m. in the morning, someone came to me so that he doesn't face retaliation. We will call him O. O once came to me before. You can hear his voice or read his words here. But this time, O came to me. He was very distraught. And what he said to me was this. He said, "Listen, I just got finished speaking to the staff. I've been asking them for a single cubicle area for a long time. For those who don't know, Salvation Army Bell Shelter Men's Dorm has two types of cubicle. One cubicle has one bed and a locker, and the other types of cubicle have two beds. You have a roommate. If you have a roommate, it can get extremely unpleasant. That depends on whether he's an unpleasant person. It depends on whether he keeps you up late at night. It depends on whether he's clean. It depends on whether he causes your items to mysteriously disappear. So often, having a single cubicle unit could greatly help you in transitioning out and getting on your feet again. So he said to me at 10 a.m. on April 7th, 2016, he was distraught. O said to me, he came to me, just as many people bring their problems to me because they know I'm going to help, despite the threats that I've been given about helping clients. He said, the staff said to me that I can't have a single unit even though one has been open for a while. I said to him, yes, I know. I've seen that single cubicle open for a long while. And he said, I know. This has happened before. Last time I asked them about it, they said, I have to wait. Then I waited and one came open, and then they said, "You have to be a veteran." I said, "I am a veteran." Then they said, then I went to the supervisor, he said, and I said, "Who did you speak to?" He said, "Alma." I said, "Okay, what did she say?" He said, after she found out I was a veteran, she said, "You have to be a member of the resident council." Now, this bothered me greatly because I need to choose my words carefully here. When we have an investigation on Salvation Army, we specifically need the federal investigation to find out if Salvation Army reserving empty beds for people who join their auxiliary projects, beds which are federally funded, we need to find out if that federal investigation determines if that is known as bribery. Not only do we need to find out if that is bribery, but we need to find out if that is the only instance of it. For me, this particular revelation suddenly makes a great deal of things clear. For me, his particular revelation to me justifies in every way, manner, and form why there is such an urgent need for a federal investigation, a public federal investigation. On April 8th, 2016, the mother of the children who had been bitten, she is evicted at 10 a.m. They tell her she must move off her cot. This is a photo of the cot in the common area where they had her. They evicted her. You can see her cot in the corner. Her sleeping conditions were worse than if she was a murderer. Murderers on death row have better sleeping conditions. They have more access to advocates. They have court-appointed lawyers. They evicted her by violating her Fourth Amendment U.S. constitutional rights. She is a mother of 2 children. She provided photos which we presented to Steve Lytle in a room full of staff members, which graphically depicted how bad the hygiene and the bedbug problem is when it showed her children having bite marks. This bothered me greatly. It bothered me greatly. We believe she was targeted because she helped us. We believe she was targeted because she spoke up for her rights. At that point, I realized I must continue the documentation. I remembered what O said about Alma saying they are saving the private cubicle for the resident council member. So, let me tell you what the resident council is. A couple of weeks ago, when we first announced publicly the start of the Internal Client Association, the Resident Advocate Association, they told us that long time ago, they once had a resident council member, but clients did not take to it. It's weird the way they said it. It sounded like, I don't know, like the Matrix movie when they were describing how the people did not take to the world of paradise. They said the clients did not take to it and they abandoned the resident council structure. They abandoned it. So they wanted us to abandon our internal client association collective structure and take up their hierarchy structure and provide them with minutes and provide them with the names of our members. You see, in ICA, only the administrative members make their identities public. The rest of our members are private, so they don't receive retaliation. But they wanted us to adapt to their group. And when Steve Lido gave me the letter that told me we should end the activities of ICA, he encouraged me to take up their resident council. But you see, they have not been able to encourage people to sign up for the resident council. Many people, as you can imagine, have come to me and asked me to run for the president of the resident council, and I quickly told them, no. Just as I told the staff members at that meeting, no, I will not participate in your resident council. And I told the clients the reason, privately, why I won't participate. And because, basically, to put it in a very sweet two-word package, it's a mole patrol. They're encouraging people to give the names of clients who speak up, who give the complaints. This enables them to retaliate against them. Every member who we have given their identity to the staff, they've been retaliated against quickly. You saw what happened to Jay. You saw what happened to E when they found the fuzzy urine test that he had to check up on and it turned out to be clean. This happens repeatedly. So I would not join the mole patrol. And in order for them to try to get people, based upon what O said, it seems that they are using the beds. So we asked the federal investigators to look into it, and I decided that documentation of this needed to be recorded. So I went through and not only took a photo, as you can see here, of the empty single cubicle bed, but to my surprise, I took a photo of the many empty double cubicle beds. How is it that so many of the beds are empty in Los Angeles, the city with the largest population of homeless veterans in the country? How is it? Based upon what O said, we know there's a filtering process. So if there is one unethical filtering process, we need a federal investigation to see if there are more unethical filtering processes. Perhaps they have a filtering process based on race. We know they've done filtering processes based on pregnancy. We've seen the court records. We've seen the settlement. We need transparency. That was April 8th, 2016. So I give this illustration of just a few events that have been happening. This is just 10% of the many things, because so many residents bring to me what's happening to them. Because so few are willing to take on those responsibilities, because the retaliation is so severe. This is why we need those of you who care about equality to speak up. Now, everything that I say next, as I conclude, until the end of this message, will be from the heart and the words of Martin Luther King, Jr. I find him to be inspirational, and his words are very appropriate and eloquently said in a way that I cannot begin to accomplish. The only words from me is my summary of my message. We need extreme love, peace, and inspiration, civil disobedience education to bring a long overdue uprising and elevation of human rights. These are the words of Martin Luther King, and I quote, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inseparable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. It is unfortunate that the white power structure left the Negro community with no alternative. In any nonviolent campaign, there are 4 basic steps: collection of the facts to determine whether injustices exist, negotiation, self-purification, and direct action. We have gone through all these steps. We had no alternative except to prepare for direct action, whereby we would present our very bodies as a means of laying our case before the conscience of the local and the national community. Mindful of the difficulties involved, we decided to undertake a process of self-purification. Are you able to endure the ordeal of jail? We decided to schedule our direct action program for the Easter season, realizing that except for Christmas, this is the main shopping period of the year. Knowing that a strong economic withdrawal program would be the byproduct of direct action, we felt that this would be the best time to bring pressure to bear on the merchants for the needed change. You may well ask, why direct action? Why sit-ins, marches, and so forth? Isn't negotiation a better path? You are quite right in calling for negotiation. Indeed, This is the very purpose of direct action. Non-violent direct action seeks to create such a crisis and foster such a tension that a community which has constantly refused to negotiate is forced to confront the issue. It seeks so to dramatize the issue that it can no longer be ignored. My citing the creation of tension as part of the work of the nonviolent resistor may sound rather shocking. But I must confess that I am not afraid of the word tension. I have earnestly opposed violent tension, but there is a type of constructive, nonviolent tension which is necessary for growth. My friends, I must say to you that we have not made a single gain in civil rights without determined legal and nonviolent pressure. We have waited for more than 340 years for our constitutional and God-given rights. We should never forget that everything Adolf Hitler did in Germany was legal, and everything the Hungarian freedom fighters did in Hungary was illegal. It was illegal to aid and comfort a Jew in Hitler's Germany. Even so, I am sure that, had I lived in Germany at the time, I would have aided and comforted my Jewish brothers. But though I was initially disappointed at being categorized as an extremist, as I continued to think about the matter, I gradually gained a measure of satisfaction from the label. Was not Jesus an extremist for love? Love your enemies. Bless them that curse you. Do good to them that hate you. And pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you. So the question is not whether we will be extremists, but what kind of extremists we will be. Will we be extremists for hate or for love? Unquote. We need extreme love, peace, and inspiration, civil disobedience, education, to bring a long overdue uprising and elevation of human rights.